Hi, I'm Tamara Zoner. Welcome to Spirit Cafe. Come in, sit down, and grab a cup of love. Hello and welcome, Spirit Cafe viewers and listeners. I am Tamara Zoner, and it's great to be back with you. As I often do, I have a guest today that I'm going to learn about along with you. I might have a little bit more intel, but I love for our guests to tell us who they are and teach us who they are. So you're going to be right along this ride with me. I would love to introduce Neil McKinlay. And Neil, welcome to Spirit Cafe. Why don't you tell us what you love for people to know about you?
Well, thank you very much, Tamara. It's great to be here. What do I love for people to know about me? That is a very interesting entrance question.
I like to get right to the heart of things.
What do I love for people to know about me? I live in Victoria, British Columbia with my wife and daughter, and that was me looking out the window at Victoria, British Columbia while we are recording here. I am a rabid fan of Bob Dylan and Roger Federer and Alice Munro. And I'm also a teacher and mentor of meditation.
Awesome. So you teach something called embodied meditation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, embodied meditation is a form of meditation where we are directing our attention toward our embodied experience. Every style of meditation that I know, and I don't know all styles of meditation, but every style that I know asks us to direct our attention somewhere. And what is notable about embodied meditation is we are directing our attention toward our embodied experience. And one might say, well, why do we do that? We do that because when we direct our attention in this, we find a relatively ready ability to settle into our experience. And as we settle into our experience, our embodied experience, this embodied moment, we begin to access innate qualities that are built into us as human beings that I think have a lot to offer in terms of acting as a ground from which we engage our everyday lives. These would be qualities like stability, qualities like stillness, qualities like clarity and wisdom, tenderness, compassion, responsiveness. All these yummy qualities we actually begin to deepen our relationship with when we turn our attention toward our embodied experience, embodied meditation, settle into whatever's happening for us in this moment, and rest.
Beautiful. For any of our listeners or watchers who aren't as familiar with the term embodied, can you explain the difference between disembodied and embodied?
Embodied is, excuse me, embodied speaks to a sense of conscious awareness, conscious presence of, I use the phrase, this embodied moment. And what is this embodied moment? It's an inclusive term that points to a sense of awareness and presence of what we consider, I call it the apparently bounded body, the personal body, the flesh and bones body that all of us associate with this term. It also includes this relational sense perception body, this sense of what our senses are and what they know that allows us to enjoy our connection, our relationship with the world and everything that's in it. And then the sense of the earth body, that sense of still, steady presence underneath. So embodied and embodiment speaks to all of these. It's an inclusive term that speaks to our relationship with all of these aspects of being.
Mm. You have a very relaxing presence, so I can see why meditation is your jam. How did you get into it? What can you give us a little bit of background on your own spiritual journey and how you first experienced meditation, and then what drove you to begin teaching it?
Well, how I started with meditation was one of the things that's really been a theme in my practicing of meditation and in my teaching of meditation is really connecting it with our everyday lives, this sense of the ordinary everydayness of meditation practice. And I kind of spoke to that a few moments ago when I talked about connecting with these yummy qualities
Mhm.
and allowing them to act as a ground as we go out and meet the stuff, the challenges of our everyday life. And, very true to that theme, my beginning with meditation was very ordinary, very everyday. I was a competitive swimmer. And it was an interesting time to be a competitive swimmer. This would have been the late 1970s, the early 1980s. So I'm dating myself here, but the late 1970s, the early 1980s. And sports psychology was beginning to nudge towards the mainstream. It was still a little bit weird out there on the peripheries, but it was beginning to nudge towards the mainstream. And the team I was on, the coaching staff, was actually very open to all of this stuff. So we were doing things like progressive relaxation and visualization and goal setting, all this stuff that sounds completely normal now, but was like completely
Yes.
woo woo back then. And part of this suite of tools that we explored was meditation. I was taught to meditate as a competitive swimmer. And it certainly helped that I knew that the Beatles meditated. And so I assumed that it must be something good if they meditated, right?
Right.
But I found something compelling about the practice. There's something, and even to this day, I'm not sure I can put a finger exactly on the reasons why I meditate. It continues to simply be compelling in some way. So from the beginning, it was compelling to me, and I stayed with it. I think probably for the first couple of years that I considered myself a meditator, I wasn't meditating. I probably thought I was meditating, but I was probably just sitting there with my eyes closed, not moving all that much.
A good
Um,
start for any
it's
new.
a good start, kind of training for a lot of hours of sitting there with my eyes closed, not moving very
Right.
much. But about 30 years ago, I started to study and practice in a couple of successive communities, and both of these were rooted in Tibetan Buddhism, so formal Buddhist practice, which gave me opportunities to engage formal curriculum and do long retreats. And so, I started to formally train in this stuff. And you asked how I started to teach, and it's actually linked to the swimming story. After I ended my swimming career, I hopped out of the water and stood on deck and said, "I'm going to be a coach now." And so I was a coach for a very long time. And when that career ended quite suddenly, I was literally sitting at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, saying, what am I going to do now? And my wife walked by. I'm not even sure she stopped. I think it might have literally been a passing comment, but she walked by on my right hand side and she said, "Well, you're trained to meditate. Why don't you teach?" And that was the beginning of it.
Women's wisdom just pops right out sometimes.
It's just like, wow, great idea.
And so then you began your own did you go try to find a job, or did you just immediately say, "I'm gonna do this," and start your own business?
It was more of the latter. It was, I'm gonna do this. Because I was still working in the second of these two communities. There were opportunities to teach within that umbrella. And there was also this element of I'm gonna do this. I literally walked down to the community center that is about 15 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. And I knocked on the door of the programmer and said, "How do I teach meditation for you?" And that was the beginning of it.
Nice. That's so beautiful. Were you, as a child, was your family spiritual? Did they meditate, or did you only come to it through the swimming?
I really came to it through the swimming. My maternal grandmother has told me that my maternal grandfather, who I never met, he died well before I was born, um, was a very spiritual person, that he used to write psalms for himself.
Oh, wow.
But that's the only inkling of that sort that I'm aware of in my family lineage.
Okay. So it wasn't, yeah, it didn't happen in most people's childhoods, I think.
Yeah.
Unless their parents were hippies, but um, so that's really a lovely progression. It seems like every door that was supposed to close or open for you has. And I know that you've had some adversity in your experience as
Yeah.
well. Are you open to sharing that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I talked about being part of two successive communities that my training took place in these two successive communities. And the second of these I was part of for 20 years. I started in 1999 into early 2020. I was part of that community. And in around 2016, my relationship with that second community started to get a little bit shaky. I started to feel uncomfortable with the way that the leader was treating his students, specifically his close students, long-time students, such as myself. And, over the next couple of years, this discomfort did nothing but intensify until it really eventually became apparent to me that, much to my shock, because I'd been told something different, I believed something different as a senior person in the community, I had told people something different. But much to my shock, it became apparent to me that what was driving the community was not the teachings or and the practices of meditation. It wasn't the well-being and the development of the students, especially the senior students. What was driving the situation to my eye was really the self-centered impulses of the leader.
Mm.
And the extents, plural, the extents that he was willing to go to assert these impulses was really quite shocking to me. It created an environment that was characterized by manipulation, by disempowerment, by disrespect. And, to give you one example, he was, in my mind, a master of what I call the bait and switch, promising, teasing, putting one thing out there, and when we were hooked, taking it away, and sometimes replacing it with something else, sometimes having nothing there and pretending like nothing had ever happened and expecting all of us to silently go along, which was often what we did. And, I do understand that, someone listening to that may say, well, that doesn't sound like much. Like, so he's not very good at agreements. He's not very good at commitments. But when the dynamic repeats over years and when plans and schedules and lives are upended by this, and it's all by an authority figure that one
Mhm.
trusts, who seems to have little concern for the consequences, it's very undermining, and the effect was literally crazy making.
Yeah,
And
it sounds very toxic, very
yeah,
disorienting, just what someone who abuses authority tries to do to the people that depend on them.
and very disorienting is a really painfully apt phrase, because that's what it felt like. I felt like I was spending so much of my time just turning my head from left to right, wondering what just happened.
Mhm.
Something happened. I think something happened, but what is it? And so, this is intensifying over a period of years. And by, 2019, the year 2019 was just consumed with struggle. And it was struggle that happened on many levels for me. But most significantly, I think in retrospect, was the fact that my inner knowing, this knowing that we all have about what's going on, about what's appropriate, about what's inappropriate, was being so regularly undermined in that situation, that at a certain point, the struggle became so intense that I was actually physically and mentally compromised,
Mm.
just in such a way, to such an extent that I had to leave. I just had to leave. And so in February 2020, 20 years later, I made this difficult but necessary choice to leave, which, you were talking about doors closing and doors opening. Curiously, it's opened up a path not only to recovery and healing for me, but a path of exploration and discovery that, continues to this day, which is really quite shocking and surprising to me.
It's fascinating the way the universe works because In my own experience and in experience with clients, it's as if we're put under this pressure when we're trying to stay with what we know, but something greater than us knows that it's not for us, not for our highest good. It's has to mount all this pressure until we can no longer bear it. We have to get so uncomfortable because our brains just love the status quo no matter what. And so it has to get so deeply uncomfortable and almost out of integrity. So it's like our whole body is out of alignment with our being, that we're forced, we make the choice, but we feel forced to let that pressure valve open and to walk away. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. Did you
Yeah.
feel courageous as you did that? Or
Um,
looking back, do you recognize how courageous that was?
Looking back, I recognize how courageous it was. At the time, it felt like survival, and
Mhm.
there was a certain awareness of the courage it was taking to step into alignment with my own survival. But more than anything else, it was sheer, you know, survival instinct. I can't do this for a moment longer. I have to get out. And, but in retrospect, yes, definitely courageous because while there was a whole lot of relief in leaving, the loss, um, was and has been overwhelming because I lost so much. I lost a path, I lost peers, I lost a livelihood, as we spoke about a few minutes ago. I was teaching, I was working in that context. I lost trust, confidence, direction, you know,
Yeah,
the,
there's so much grief to go along with leaving any long-term relationship. I mean, ultimately, that's what you had.
yeah,
And there's so much grief no matter what. If you're the one who chooses, or if, a lot of people felt forced out by things because COVID hit right after you
yeah.
left that group. And there's grief. And we have to, that meditation, like the whole part of your life that is and intertwined with that experience is probably also, and correct me if I'm wrong, what helped you through it.
Well, that's a really interesting point because, I spoke a second ago about loss. And I mean, it's a great word for me because it speaks to lostness. And that's what I felt. I had no idea what to do.
Mm.
I was so lost. I had no idea what to do. And just like, way back in day one, when swim coach is teaching me how to meditate and I decide to stay with it, I cannot explain why I turned toward meditation in this context. I think it would have been a great time to walk away, to be completely honest.
Right, you might have just
But
rejected the whole thing.
I'm done. But
Yeah.
what happened is I turned toward meditation for no reason that I can point to. Almost every day I meditated. And what happened was really remarkable to me. I mean, it was really shocking. I started to settle in. And I started to settle into what was happening, which means I was settling into that lostness, not changing, not getting rid of, but settling into that overwhelming sense of lostness. And
Mhm.
as I settled in, out of this, there was these ongoing experiences of insight that spoke directly to what was happening, directly to what was going on for me, that lostness. Which, in some ways, this is just meditation 101. You settle and then there's insights. This is what meditation is. But the fact that it was so connected with this intense experience was like illuminating for me. And it pointed out a third phase of meditation, if you will, that I hadn't really recognized before. One in which I let the insight that comes out of that settling guide me into my life. And this is what I started doing because I didn't know what else to do. I was so lost. And I want to make this clear, it was very ordinary. So if what came up in meditation was a sense of fatigue, I would rest.
Okay.
If what came up was loneliness, I would reach out to people. If what came up was a sense of stuckness, I sought out trauma therapy. And that third phase, that recognition that meditation is actually offering guidance. The practice of meditation allows me to tap into this never-ending source of guidance and direction in my life was revelational,
Oh my
as
gosh, after
was
20 years of meditating, you learned what it's all about.
it's like, oh my gosh, I learned what it's all about. I also learned a lot about community because I think the second thing worth noting in this here is that much of the practice I have been doing the last couple of years has happened in community.
Mhm.
And with the end of the difficult relationship, and as you noted, the arrival of COVID, I mean, all my teaching livelihood vanished in early 2020. And so I started offering something online, which has evolved into this community called the Online Gatherings. And in doing so, I got to see these amazing, brilliant, articulate, vulnerable, adaptive ways that people were not only engaging meditation, but meeting the challenges of their lives.
Mhm.
And so with these two, under the influence of these two, much to my surprise, I found myself kind of moving through the loss a little bit, not getting over it because I still have some pretty rough days,
Mm.
but finding my way through with meditation, kind of healing a damaged relationship with my own inner wisdom, and with community affirming and modeling the existence of this inner knowing over and over and over again, simply by virtue of showing up and being themselves.
I love that so much, and I really want to acknowledge you for the wisdom of going through. I talk about this a lot in my own speaking and coaching, and people try to get rid of those negative emotions that they think are bad. And really, they're just a part of our human experience. And we
Mhm.
have to move through them to fully release them so that we're not storing them or sticking them, down deep. They'll come back bigger, louder later
Yeah.
unless we move through them and allow them to move through us. It's like these emotions and these experiences are truly gifts for us if we're willing to receive them. And then this is the one and only reason I ever meditate, which I try to do each day, is so that I can shut off all the outside noise and hear my own higher wisdom for that guidance you were talking about. And it's
Yeah.
so beautiful how each one of us will hear it or feel it or sense it maybe in a different way. I really like how you just were like, If I'm tired, I guess I'm going to go have a rest, you know?
And I think I needed that. I needed it to be that simple and that ordinary and that everyday to people will often say about my teaching, they say, well, it's just so clear and so understandable and so ordinary and so no big deal. And my reply is, well, I need it to be that way. And this sense of guidance and direction arising out of my embodied experience, arising out of my practice of meditation, I needed it to really be that simple. I needed to be flattened to the mat, and then I need it to be like, wow, I'm really tired. Maybe I'll rest this afternoon. I'm really lonely.
Yeah.
I'm really stuck. You know, it needed to be that ordinary for me to really kind of connect the dots.
Yes. And simply to be still and quiet enough to notice and to
Yeah.
have that awareness of what you're actually experiencing instead of busy making,
Hmm.
and overstimulation, to be willing to be quiet, to get in touch with how you're actually feeling on an emotional level, on a physical level, on a spiritual level. That's courageous too.
That takes a lot of courage. I would agree.
Not everybody slows down. Not
No.
everybody is willing to get that quiet and tune
Yeah.
into themselves. That's really beautiful. So, what now you've had experience with your own meditation teachers and you've been teaching this long enough. So, when you talk to people who are new to a practice of meditation or even just considering it, like what do you share with them are the benefits for it?
Well, it's interesting. I actually had the first session in a beginner class last night at the community center, 15 minutes walk from here. And we talked very much about what we were talking about early on in this conversation. I talked about, meditation as a practice of turning toward our embodied lives, our embodied experience, settling into whatever is happening for us in this moment, and then accessing these fundamental qualities. And fundamental qualities means they're basic in who we are. They're there on a good day and a bad day, when our hair is wet, when our hair is dry, whether we wear glasses or contacts. These qualities are there. And I talked about how the thin edge of the wedge, in terms of us beginning to sense these mysterious qualities in our life with regard to meditation, is very often relaxation. you
Mm.
know, we turn our attention toward embodied experience, we settle into this embodied moment, and, we begin to relax. And, then we'll go to our friends, we'll go to the coffee shop with our friends on Thursday morning and we'll say, like, hey, I went to this meditation class and boy, meditation really relaxes me. And I understand where that statement's coming from, but it's actually not accurate. Meditation doesn't relax us. Meditation puts us in contact with the fundamental ease, well-being, and relaxation that is always within us.
Mm.
And so that was what we talked about in terms of the benefits. We talked a little bit more about, qualities like clarity and stillness and compassion, tenderness, and so on. But we talked mostly about that sense of inner well-being, that sense of relaxation that just waits for us to touch it, waits for us to settle into it. And, as you put it a few moments ago, how do we settle into it? By going through what's going on.
Mm. Mhm. So beautiful. And, I find that more than relaxing, meditation is renewing and
Yeah.
energizing, because it's our thoughts that weigh us down. And when we can just find a pause within them, and you don't have to do it perfectly, people. Like, don't tell me you tried and it doesn't work for you, because that just means you gave up. Uh, it's so energizing, and it's
Yeah.
so clarifying on multiple levels, right? You get
Yes.
clarity, but it's also clarifying because it's like a cleansing of the overload of thinking.
Yeah, it's very much like the image that sometimes heard used is, it's like going to a pond and very gently, sweeping aside the sticks and leaves and grit that has come to the surface and
Mhm.
drinking from the water that waits underneath. And that feels very apt to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So how long do you recommend people meditate each day?
That's a great question. Um, One of the things that I've really learned over the years that I've been teaching is that for meditation to get a toehold in our lives, meditation really needs to meet us in our lives. And so, in terms of something like how long, if I come up with something and say, okay, 20 minutes, you need to do 20 minutes. That's how long you need to meditate. For some people, that's gonna be, okay, that's doable. For
Mhm.
other people, however, it's not gonna meet the reality of your life. Like, suppose, you're a parent raising, 3 young children. 20 minutes may be a bit of a reach, and so all of a
Yeah.
sudden, this person on this podcast, who's apparently an expert, has set a bar that's too high, and so meditation's out of reach for me.
Mhm.
So what I really do is I leave it really open-ended for people. I say, look at your inspiration and look at the reality of your life circumstance and do what you can. And everything you do is a practice. If you sit
Yes.
down to meditate, everything you do is a practice. If it's a minute long, that's a practice. If it's 5 minutes long, that's a practice. If it's 45 minutes long, that's a practice. And so, in terms of getting that toehold, getting started, which is for some reason not easy with meditation, in terms of getting started, I really encourage people to set a bar for themselves that respects the realities of their life, their
So good.
inspiration, and their actual situation that they find themselves in.
I love that. That is so spacious. You know, having been a mother of 3 young children, now 3 teenagers, it's, and that's what I'll teach people too. If you it's I don't say what I don't know if it was Buddha or the Dalai Lama, if you don't have time for 10 minutes of meditation, meditate for an hour. I don't say that. I say, if you don't have 10 minutes, then take 30 seconds or a minute because it really can make a huge difference, even if all you're doing is for 1 minute, putting your attention on your breath and
Mhm.
nothing else. And if other stuff comes in, don't beat yourself up about it. Just refocus. It's just
Yeah.
everything in this life is a practice. Happiness is a practice. Meditation is a practice. Parenting is a practice.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and I do, there's a woman that I worked with years ago. I haven't seen her in a long time, but, we did a workshop together, a workplace workshop together years ago. So I taught meditation at lunch at an office downtown.
Nice.
And, I'd run into her from time to time and ask her how her practice was going. And she would meditate for 5 minutes, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, at her desk from 12 till 12:05. So the lunch bell would go, everyone would get up and go to lunch. She would sit at her desk for 5 minutes and meditate. Now, I tend to meditate longer than 5 minutes. And so I was really curious. I would say, like, okay, you still doing that? And she would say, yes. And I said, do you still notice a benefit? And she invariably would say, yeah, I really notice. I notice it through the week. And then on the weekend, my family life is too full. I can't get to it. By
Mhm.
Sunday night, I can notice that I'm less settled. I'm a little more impatient. I'm a little more scattered. And I'm looking forward to going to work so I can meditate at lunch.
Wow.
5 minutes, 5 days a week.
Every little bit helps, right?
It makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So, how do people work with you directly?
Well, there are a number of things that I offer out there, and people can go to my website to take a look at the range, everything from, free writings, free guided practices, recordings for beginners, so on and so forth. The
Nice.
main thing I offer is this thing called the online gatherings. That's really, kind of the core of my offerings. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. This is a group of people who sense, who believe, who hope, who long to believe that meditation can connect us with the wisdom that's inherent in our person, our communities, and our lives. And we come together in order to develop a really practical understanding of the teachings and practices of meditation together so that we can encourage and empower one another, so that we can inspire and support one another as we become familiar with this wisdom and as we begin to allow it to express, guide us, direct us in our lives. And so the website is kind of the clearinghouse of everything, and the
Okay.
online gatherings, this community of empowerment, support, and wisdom is really, the main offering.
Beautiful. I will be sure to put those links in the show notes. And finally, Neil, if if you could tell the entire world just one thing about meditation, what is the main, like, lasered in message that you want people to know?
I think the message is going to come out of certainly my experience with meditation, but really my experience of the last 2.5 years, the aftermath of exiting this dysfunctional relationship. Um, and it would be simply that we are resourced beyond our wildest imaginings. And whilst certainly we're all probably going to need various degrees and kinds of help and assistance and guidance and support in accessing that resourcefulness,
Mhm.
um, the core involves simply turning toward and settling in and moving through or moving into the stuff of our lives, that we find that resourcefulness, we find that purpose, we find that direction, however we want to phrase it, actually in the stuff of our lives, which for me recently has been a whole lot of, devastation and loss. And much to my surprise, I find doors opening within that experience all the time.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you so much. I really am very grateful for your vulnerability in this conversation and your beautiful, peaceful energy. Even as you talk about hardship in your experience, there is a clear quality of peacefulness within you. And I bet you're an amazing meditation teacher, because I feel like I've learned more about meditation in these last 30 minutes than in the last 5 years. And I talk about it all the time.
Excellent. That's good to hear. I really appreciate hearing that.
So thank you so much. And yes, people listening or watching, check out Neil McKinlay, and I will share those links in all of the places that this gets posted. So I'm going to close us out. I would love for you all to share in the comments what was your biggest takeaway from this experience, and then go visit Neil on his website and maybe in the online gathering. That sounds like an incredible community. I'm all for community. And tell us what you think about that. And otherwise, I will talk to you again next week. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you for joining us on Spirit Cafe. Please leave all comments on our Spirit Cafe Facebook page or in the comments below our YouTube videos.